All right, so the way we're going to take notes for this lesson today, very similar to what we did in the last economics unit. So you're going to grab a piece of paper or a Google Doc if you want to type. You're going to divide it into two columns, one for terms and the other for definitions. The color scheme has changed a little bit, so terms are going to be in blue, definitions are going to be in pink. And then, as usual, don't forget to upload your notes when you are finished in order to receive full credit. All right. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about American political culture. So you guys probably view America as a very polarized or divided nation, one that's divided by political ideology, race, gender, geography, etc., etc. There's so many things that divide us, right? But while it's true that there are many beliefs that tear us apart, beneath those differences, we actually do share some things in common, at least according to political scientists. So, political scientists have argued that Americans share what's called a common political culture. So, there's your term, and this is a distinctive and patterned way of thinking about thinking about how political life ought to be carried out. So, kind of the simpler version of that is that Americans, in other words, tend to share a similar set of values. We just interpret those values differently. All right. So, what are those five core values then that Americans tend to share? So, here's what political scientists have identified. And people tend to believe in these things again, regardless of whether they're liberals, regardless of whether they're conservative, regardless if they're from California or Indiana. And here they are. First one is popular sovereignty, which is a really fancy word for democracy. We believe in democracy. We believe in liberty or freedom. We believe in individual responsibility. We believe in equality of opportunity. And we believe in civic duty and participation. All right. So first up, popular sovereignty or democracy. So term here, popular sovereignty. And this is the idea that the people or the populace give power or sovereignty to the government. So we believe that rulers are only legitimate if we vote for them, right? And we believe that it's important for us to vote for the people who represent us, and we believe that it's important for us to weigh in on the laws that govern us. Next up is liberty. So the way we define liberty, or most of us do in the United States, we say that liberty is the freedom to do as we want as long as we don't harm others. So I'm free to choose what job I hold and what I do for fun, what religion I belong to, etc., right? But of course, we can't just do anything we want at any time. Most Americans would agree that your rights and liberties end where they begin to infringe on somebody else's, right? So maybe I don't have the freedom to hurt other people, right? Because that infringes on other people's rights and liberties as well. All right. Number 3 is individualism. And this is the idea, or individual responsibility is another way you can put it. And this is the idea that each person is responsible for their own selves, their own actions, and their own success or failure. So I saw this on some of your guys' responses to that current events assignment. You're like, well, hey, I understand that the government's giving people money as part of relief for the pandemic, but some of you guys were a little bit worried. Maybe, does that maybe discourage individual responsibility? You're like, well, I don't want people to have to rely on the government for help. Maybe I want them to rely on their own selves or their communities, right? So generally in the United States, we tend to believe that Americans should rely on our own hard work. So if you've ever heard that expression, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, Americans tend to believe that in some ways or another, right? All right, so let's do a little bit of practice. So this here is a chart that shows social expenditures as a percentage of GDP, right? So we know that GDP, gross domestic product, that's everything that we produce in the United States, all the goods and services, right? Well, take a look here. How much does the United States spend on social programs such as welfare, right, compared to other countries? So here we are, right? We spend a little bit more than 15% of our GDP on things like welfare and healthcare and other things like that, right? Take a look at where, for example, Sweden, they spend over 30% of their GDP on those kinds of programs. Or remember when we did the current events assignment and you read about Denmark paying people's salaries during the pandemic, they spend just a little bit over 25% of their GDP on social expenditures, right? So as we mentioned, we talked about this in class, Denmark tends to spend a lot more of, or they tend to spend a lot more on social welfare than we do in the United States. Well, how does this connect to the idea of individual responsibility? All right. Value number 4 is called equality of opportunity. So yes, we Americans tend to believe, as we mentioned, right, that people are accountable for their own success and failure, but we also believe that people deserve the same opportunities to be successful. So we generally don't believe that people should have different opportunities based on where they come from in life. And this is really different, right, from maybe like the country, England, when we declared independence, right? So way back when, in England, your success and failure in life was determined, or partly determined, right, by what social class you're in. So if you were a noble, you had a lot better chances in life than if you were some random commoner, right? So the idea that people should have access to the same kinds of opportunities in life, regardless of what social class or what race or what gender they are, this is called equality of opportunity. So everyone has access to the same opportunities. Now, it's really important to realize this is not the same as the idea of equality of result. So equality of result means that all people receive the same outcome in life. So maybe everyone earns the same income, right? Everyone has an equal amount of resources, right? And you're like, hey, that's communism. So most studies demonstrate that Americans, unlike many European countries, don't support things like limiting top incomes or making everyone have the same income, right? So it suggests that we don't value equality of result. All right, last but not least, Americans also believe in the importance of civic duty. So that's our term there. And this is the idea that it's important for us to participate in government and give back to society. So the fact that this course is required for graduation really suggests that we value doing our civic duty, right? Because taking a civics course like government and economics, that's a form of doing our civic duty. And if we require that, that means we probably value it, right? Other examples of doing our civic duty: volunteering, voting, staying informed by reading the news or watching the news on TV or listening to it on the radio, doing jury duty, right? And then what are some other examples that you can think of? All right, but let's talk about voting as a measure of civic duty. Do Americans really value voting? So according to this graph, what percentage of people voted in the most recent national election? So take a look at the United States here. What percentage voted in the most recent national election? At least according to this graph. It's from 2016. This 2016 presidential. How many Americans voted in the 2016 national elections? Take a look there. Hold up. 55.7%. That's not that much, is it? I thought you just said that Americans believe it's important to vote. Well, interestingly enough, Americans, yeah, we value civic duty, but we actually don't really, while we do see voting as part of that, we're a lot less likely than other countries to see voting as a really, really like the number one important measure of civic duty, right? You can see like Belgium here, for example, 87.2% of Belgians turned out to vote in their most recent national election, right? So maybe Belgians see voting as a more important part of civic duty than those of us in the United States. And actually, studies have shown that Americans actually, when we think of civic duty, a lot of times we tend to think of volunteering. So I'm curious, what's your take? What do you think is a more important part of civic duty, voting or volunteering? All right. Now you might be wondering, hold up, if we share so many similar values, why is there so much conflict over things like abortion or LGBTQ rights or immigration or any of the 400 million other things we fight about in the United States? Well, my take on this personally is that even though we tend to share a lot of values as an American, we tend to interpret these values differently. So, case in point, which we're going to look at shortly, is affirmative action. You'll find out what that is and how we interpret values around that differently.